Welcome to the White House. My name is Jared Bernstein. I have the privilege of being the Director of Jewish Outreach here in the Office of Public Engagement. An early Chag Sameach to everybody here. Thank you for coming. It's a fantastic event. Thank you to the exhibit and to the Jewish Museum of Maryland. Thank you to the NEH. Thank you to Joan and Bill. Thank you to the DCJCC, who was a fantastic partner on this event. And even if they were called in a little bit late in the game, they very much rose to the occasion, and thank you to them. Not to single out staff, but to single out staff. To Kaylin Green from the NEH, who was fantastic and just took this event and helped run with it. To Courtney Chapin from the NEH, who was a fantastic partner to work with, and would not let even when my head was in 18 different directions, just would not let me lose focus. And to Daniel Ensign from the Office of Public Engagement, who doesn't even get paid to be here. He's an intern, and just ran with this event as well. To my predecessor in this job, Danielle Boren, who's here, thank you for getting me on the hook for this. It's been the ride of a lifetime. You know, my favorite holiday is Passover. Couldn't tell you why exactly. When I was in college, I had the privilege of going on a mission to the Ukraine to run Passover programming and conduct seders where there hadn't been seders since before the Second World War. And it was an amazing experience for 1,000 reasons. And while I was a stranger there, I was amongst family. One of the great things that unite us as a people is our food. And I remember very vividly sitting down at a Seder table in Odessa, not being able to speak a lick of Russian, and recognizing what gefilte fish looked like on the table, even if it was in Ukraine. And I think that, you know, the food tells the story of where the family's been, where the family has come from, and where the family is going. And I think that that's what we're here to celebrate today. I don't want to take up too much time. We have our celebrity chefs and one or two other preliminary speakers, and we really want to get to them. A note on kashrut. All of the food that is out for consumption was prepared at the DCJCC, and from all kosher ingredients. Anybody have any questions about that? They can see me off to the side, and I can kind of elaborate. And I did see Nechama Shem Tov. Your husband is not here to correct me, so I might get away with one or two. But thank you again for being here. I now want to introduce Carol Middleman, the Acting Director of Public Programs at the NEH, to say a few words. Karen?
Thank you, and many thanks to Jared and all of his colleagues in the White House Office of Public Engagement for welcoming us here today and making this event possible. About 25 years ago, I started my first job in a Jewish museum, and I called my grandmother to tell her the good news. I got my first job out of graduate school. I could hear her sigh at the other end of the phone. "Karen," she said, "Karen, when are you going to get a real job?" And I'm afraid I only made matters worse. A few years later, I called her and came for a visit. And during our visit, she pulled out her mother's, so my great-grandmother's, hand-carved wooden rolling pins and the noodle board, a huge wooden board that my great-grandmother would roll out her noodle dough on every Friday for the Shabbos meal. It was no longer used. It was just stored in a cupboard. And I said to her, "Nana, I have to have these for my museum. I'm going to put them in an exhibit." Well, she looked at me like I had taken leave of my senses. For the children of immigrants, which my grandmother was, those artifacts of everyday life, noodle boards, the chopper that Joan has over there, the bowls, the wooden rolling pins, these objects did not belong in a museum. And food, in fact, was not a subject for serious people. It was only after decades of scholarship and a new understanding of the importance of social history that we could even imagine an exhibit like the one that we're here to celebrate today. Chosen Food, Cuisine, Culture, and American Jewish Identity. And I want to salute the Jewish Museum of Maryland for creating this truly pioneering exhibit. The museum recognized that exploring Jewish food in America could open up a whole host of stories about identity, about assimilation, about the meanings and the history of being both Jewish and American. NEH was convinced of the power of this story when the museum first came to talk to us. And I'm very proud that we supported this project with a planning grant and then subsequently with another grant for production of the exhibit. It's a wonderful example of what I think the National Endowment for the Humanities does best, which is to take the best scholarship being produced in the Academy and turn it into engaging, accessible formats like a museum exhibition. Chosen Food draws on the power of the humanities to shed new light on a subject that we thought was familiar, like food. For Jews, and probably for most Americans, food is never simply about eating. Food is a way to observe, a way to celebrate, to maintain tradition or to create new traditions. It's a way to connect with family and reconnect with the larger community, to recover memories, but also to create new meanings. As one of the project advisors to Chosen Food, Hasia Diner, reminds us, a group's way of food goes way beyond an exploration of cooking and consumption. It amounts to a journey to the heart of its collective world. The National Endowment for the Humanities is very proud to invite you today on a journey into the heart of the Jewish world through food. Our guides on this journey today will be Joan Nathan, the much acclaimed author of 10 cookbooks featuring Jewish, Israeli, and American cuisine. Her most recent book is Quiches, Kugels, and Couscous, My Search for Jewish Cooking in France. She's served as the guest curator of food culture at the Smithsonian Folklife Festival, host of a PBS series, Jewish Cooking in America with Joan Nathan, and she's really been a leader in helping us to explore and to document the tremendous variety of Jewish foodways and food lore. And her wonderful recipe for matzah balls, by the way, is in today's New York Times. Acting as Joan's sous chef today, this afternoon, is
I like that.
Casas, the White House pastry chef since 2007. Prior to that, Bill served as executive pastry chef at several New York restaurants, including Tavern on the Green and Montrachet. No Jewish meal is complete without stories. So providing some storytelling and commentary for today's event will be Avi Dechter, Executive Director of the Jewish Museum of Maryland, joined by Karen Falk, the curator at the museum, Rachel Silas, Educational Programming Manager at the museum, and Juliana Oakes Dweck, who is the Andrew Mellon Curatorial Fellow at Princeton's Art Museum, and Juliana was a consultant and co-editor on the Chosen Food Project. We're very grateful to Joan and Bill for lending your time and your energy and your creative spirit to this event. A special thank you to the team at the Washington, D.C. JCC. I just want to add my thanks, who on short notice marshaled the ingredients, did the cooking, and prepared all these wonderful treats that we're going to be trying today. Particularly Mark Spira and JCC Executive Director Carol Zawatsky. Thank you. And of course, a huge thank you to Courtney Chapin, Caitlin Green, and all the wonderful staff at NEH who made this event possible. It is my pleasure to turn things over to Avi Dechter, who has for 13 years served as the Executive Director of the Jewish Museum of Maryland. Avi is not only important to those of us in the Jewish museum business and a real leader in the Jewish museum field, he's a creative thinker and writer about Jewish history and culture, and a friend and colleague. Avi?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and welcome to everybody. This is the bread of affliction which our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. Let all who are hungry enter and eat. Let all who are in need come celebrate Pesach. With this declaration, matzah in hand, we begin the annual Passover Seder, the traditional ritual most observed in American Jewish homes across the country. Why? The wonderful meal that is an integral part of the Seder is one obvious explanation. Another is the celebratory atmosphere that characterizes a gathering of family and friends, and especially for children, but also for the adults, the challenge and appeal of stealing the afikomen. And running through the Seder and the festival, the resonant message, we were slaves in the land of Egypt. And all that flows from that fact, the fact of our liberation. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. When a stranger resides with you in your land, he shall be to you as one of your citizens. You shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. When you shake the fruit from your olive trees, do not go over them again. That shall go to the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. Always remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. Therefore do I enjoin you to observe this commandment. The Seder we celebrate today represents 3,000 years of Jewish history, tradition, and adaptation. Originally one of the 3 annual pilgrimage festivals, the Passover had to be totally reimagined after the destruction of the Jerusalem temple in 70 of the Common Era. The rabbis, in a remarkable act of appropriation and reinvention, laid the foundations for the Seder, a celebration in the form of a narrative that incorporates events and symbols, song and exegesis, questions and reflections. It also features food. Like many great rituals, the Seder provides us with an edible story. We literally and symbolically consume the narrative. As we reenact the Exodus from Egypt, we stop at frequent intervals to eat and drink wine, salt water, and greens, matzah, paschal lamb, and bitter herbs follow each other in an orchestrated sequence that culminates with the festive meal and the afikoman. The Chosen Food Project at the Jewish Museum of Maryland takes as its starting point the notion that the foods we eat and where and when we eat them and with whom help to shape the way we see ourselves, our families, and our communities. Today's program is a demonstration of how food works as a marker of identity and of culture, a vehicle for bonding and for bridging in our multicultural society. I'd like to turn the mic over to Dr. Juliana Oakes Dweck of Princeton University, who will share with us a reflection and a Passover story. Julie?
I'd like to share some thoughts about the story and practice of Passover, and then to talk about an eccentric trick that was part of my own family's Passover meal. For as much as Passover is about slavery, freedom, family, and memory, it is also about technical feats, defying the laws of time and space to achieve miracles and meaning. My grandfather's feat was perhaps more about physics than about the 4 questions, but it was nonetheless a tradition that established this holiday for me as one of personal reenactment and interpretation. Passover's story of Exodus, in which the ancient Israelites were freed from slavery in Egypt, is filled with divine interventions into the laws of nature, acts, or at least narratives, that contravened science on earth. First, God punishes Pharaoh for keeping the Israelites in bondage by inflicting 10 plagues upon the Egyptians. As God stretches out his hand, hordes of frogs and gnats and wild animals swarm the land. Once Pharaoh finally agrees to freedom, another set of wondrous occurrences allows the children of Israel to escape. In a temporal feat, when the Israelites need to quickly flee their homes, there isn't time to bake bread. So they pack the raw dough, and as they embark on their journey into the desert, it bakes in the hot sun to form hard crackers, or matzah. Soon after they set off, however, Pharaoh changes his mind and sends his soldiers after the Israelites. But when the former slaves reach the Sea of Reeds, the waters part so they can escape, the quintessential miracle. For American Jews today, as in this biblical narrative, the observance of Passover contains its own technical triumphs. This starts, of course, with the cleaning to remove all traces of leavened bread. As we sweep, vacuum, scrub, clear, pack up, wipe, remove, unpack, stack, and cover in aluminum foil, we turn our lives upside down to achieve a new order in our homes. Down on our knees or up on ladders, we work to achieve a meticulous and holy, albeit symbolic and sometimes imaginary, cleanliness. Then, as June and Nathan will soon demonstrate, there are the feats of cooking, elaborate, bountiful, savory, and kosher for Passover meals, the alchemy of glistening chicken soup with matzah balls that defy gravity, chocolate torts made out of Passover cake meal that improve upon the very chocolate they're made of, and matzah meal rolls that rise miraculously without leavening and taste, at least by the last few days of Passover, even more delicious and more custardy than popovers. Once seated at the table with the Haggadah in front of us, there are the technologies of the Passover Seder itself. At times, the symbolic meal becomes veritably calisthenic. There is a lot of dipping. We dip the karpas, often parsley, celery, or lettuce, into salt water. The vegetable symbolizing the humble origins of the Jewish people, the salt water symbolizing the tears the Israelites shed as a result of their slavery. We soon dip again, this time twice, the maror, the bitter herb, into the charoset, the double dipping, a symbolic gesture of freedom. And then 4 times, we lean to the left while we drink our cups of wine, a reclining that represents the leisure of the wealthy and the free, who can dine comfortably and without interruption. Throughout this Passover Seder, one of the central motifs is that we are entreated to think of ourselves as if we were slaves in Egypt. As we read in the Haggadah, in every generation, each person is obligated to regard himself as if he had come out of Egypt. This is an incredibly difficult act of historical empathy to pull off. How do you imagine yourself an Israelite being liberated from bondage? How do you think and feel yourself witnessing the divine suspensions of natural law in the form of plagues and splitting seas? One way of imagining oneself as witness to these miracles, as I learned as a child, is to suspend the laws of physics during the Passover Seder itself. Growing up, my parents, my sister, and I celebrated Passover at my grandparents' house on the North Shore of Long Island. My grandmother was a miraculous cook, but the most magnificent part of the Passover Seder was the entrance of Elijah, a moment my grandfather filled with wonder. After the conclusion of the grace after meals, there is a custom to pour a cup of wine for the prophet Elijah, Kos Eliyahu, to open the front door of the home, and to recite several verses from Psalms, as Elijah, it is imagined, enters the home. In my family, as these Psalms were read, the wine from Elijah's cup on the table would magically drain, as if the prophet had really joined our Seder and taken a sip. My grandfather was a builder, of boats in particular, and he was also a very clever jokester. In a slightly different way every year, he managed to rig up a contraption that would, through a tiny hole drilled in Elijah's cup, then a hole bored into the dining table, some plastic tubing, and a siphoning mechanism that led to a seat at the head of the table, drain the Manischewitz on cue. The details of his trick remain mysterious to my family, but we know he experimented until he found the right size hole so the wine would drain gradually and realistically. Somehow, this feat became even more wondrous every year, even as it became more anticipated. As many American Jews are, my grandfather was a deeply secular Jew. He was not a religious man, he was not a scholar, and he was not spiritual. He did not find meaning or sense in the laws and practices of Jewish observance. Nevertheless, this was how he celebrated the Passover holiday. Through this perfectly timed feat for his family, he brought his loves of building, creativity, and joking into the space of the Seder. For my grandfather, the play on Elijah's cup was not only his stunt, but also his religion. It was how he performed a miracle in his dining room for the people he loved, bringing the craftsmanship he valued into the sacred time of the holiday. Chag Sameach v'Kasher.
It is now our pleasure to introduce Joe Nathan and Bill Yasses, who are going to prepare a couple of wonderful dishes for our delectation and pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Avi. Thank you, the NEH and the Office of Public Engagement. Where's Danielle Boren? I think she must be here. There you are. This was all of your ideas, and I was thinking when I was walking into the White House today, on the White House grounds, can you imagine making haroset and kremzel? My great-grandfather would just die. And I realized that there are a few things, and I'll say quick, okay? And then, one is that, and I learned this writing this book on the food of the Jews of France, that nowhere in the world besides Israel and the United States are Jews as comfortable as we are. That, especially in the United States, can you imagine what we're doing today? It's just unbelievable. And I think that this country respects, don't you think, different cultures.
I hope so.
And it seems to me that food is the last element in a culture that's retained. And especially, I guess Jews like to eat, but Passover Seder is the one holiday that something like 90, I don't know what percent of American Jews celebrate. And so many, at my Seder, which you all have probably read about now, there are at least this year, there are 44 people. And half of them are intermarried. But they want to come to the Seder, and there's just so much about it. And one of the things, of course, is haroset. Now, do you know what haroset is, Phil?
I do now, yes. You know, I loved hearing you say that about bringing this recipe and this chance to talk about Jewish food at the White House. And this administration has been foremost in opening the doors and trying to bring more people and more groups into the White House for this kind of event. And so I'm just very proud to be part of it today and to work with my good friend, Joan.
I know, but we really wanted to do this just so we could kibitz together, right?
Yes, that's right.
Anyway, so I guess we can get rid of this.
Yes.
You know what the Seder plate is, right? And I just want you to taste the horseradish, to taste the bitterness of
Okay.
slavery. Okay?
Well, I love bitter flavors.
This is
so
from my
me-
garden, by the way. I dug it. I dug it out of my garden.
Very locally sourced.
Locally
sustainable.
sourced, exactly.
We're definitely in the groove here.
Right,
Yes.
with the local deer. Okay, so this haroset, which represents the mortar when the Jews were building buildings when they were slaves in Egypt, it's supposed to be sort of muddy colored.
Okay.
And there's a sweetness, and then there's also a little bit of, there isn't a bitterness, but there's a little bitterness because of nuts. This particular recipe came from Arkansas. I was giving 2 speeches in Arkansas a few weeks ago, and wherever I go, I like to meet the Jewish community, and I'm very fascinated by the role of rivers before the automobile. And I wanted to see communities in places like Pine Bluffs, Arkansas, Hot Springs, even Little Rock. And what I noticed was that the Jews are the ones who came with the river, and they established, either they were peddlers or they were dry goods people. And all along the Arkansas River and the Mississippi River, there are towns where there might not be Jews anymore, but there are cemeteries and there are recipes, because there are all these written old cookbooks. But this particular recipe is from a very old family, the Selig family, and that were one of the first people to come to Pine Bluffs. And Michael Selig, who's a chef, created this with all Arkansas products, which is local, and the nuts. And of course, he probably grew up with nuts and apples, because that was, and maybe not, but that was the Eastern European or Central European haroset. But he realized, and I think that all of us realize, that there's so many other ingredients that can come into haroset, because haroset is one, for me, it's the one dish that, or symbolic dish, that shows where the Jews have roamed.
So what is the essential haroset? What cannot be omitted and still be a haroset?
Well, it depends on who you're asking. The first haroset, actually, where do you think the first haroset came from? Anyone? Where?
Somebody said.
Where did they say? Well, probably, because in Babylonia, the Jews, with the Babylonian exile, they went to Babylon. Haroset was not part of the Seder meal before then. I mean, what were the 3 elements biblically in the Seder meal in the Bible? What are the 3 elements? No, not egg, not wine, not shenkbone, matzah, maror, bitter herbs, but it wasn't horseradish. Horseradish came with the French Jews, and because they used whatever was growing that was green in the desert, which would have been something like arugula or anything green. But it wasn't for the bitterness of slavery then, because it was before slavery. This was something that was an ancient springtime custom. And the third, of course, was roast lamb. I mean, that's what it's in the book of Exodus. And so that haroset came with the Babylonian exile. And my guess is the first haroset was basically date jam, which was cooked down dates. It's called silwan, right? Silan in Hebrew. And it's basically a puree, you know, before the Cuisinart of dates, and that it's very, very delicious.
Which
and
would have been abundant for that culture
exactly.
at the time.
But there might have been some apple in it, because apple came from Armenia, which was right near, and in Romania. So they might have had, right, exactly.
Yeah.
They might have had apples in it, and they might have had nuts in it.
Wow.
Because they do. So that was the first one. Then as Jews moved, and you could get dates some places and you couldn't. The other thing is, it was very often, there were two kinds of haroset. One would have been this syrup, and the other would have been chopped up, you know, chopped like this, or in a mortar and pestle, because they didn't have Cuisinart. And then what they would have taken is they would take the date. Again, it depended on the family and the region, the town, and they would chop up dates and nuts and make them in little balls, which we can do later with that. It's easy. And then they've spread all over the world. So at my Seder, I have at least 5 different kinds of haroset. I have a ball, which would have been dates that went to Spain, to Morocco, to the United States. And so you get them with, and all the immigrants here have all their haroset recipes.
So it still retained that symbolic meaning, but got reinterpreted and reinvented as people moved to different areas.
Exactly. You're so good. And then when they went to Central and East, because until the end of the 19th century, in the United States, in the New York Times, it used to talk about haroset, and they talk about haroset balls, because the Sephardic Jews in New York City always made balls of haroset with apples and nuts, but not dates. But dates is what they had in Europe. They didn't have dates in the colonies early on. And but then at the end of the 19th century, Eastern European Jews came here, and what did they make? They made apple and nut haroset. And so we're getting this kind of haroset now, where somebody who grew up with apples and nuts realizes he can have whatever he wants as long as it tastes good. So we're going to make this not the way I wrote it up in the New York Times, because I said to cut it individually, but I thought this would be more fun. Yeah. So first of all, you take some. You want to give me the ingredients? So I love doing this with Bill.
I gotta do something here. Okay.
Okay. So pecans, because pecans grow in Arkansas, right? And then figs, because they grow in Arkansas. And then you chop them, right? It's probably not going to chop up very well, but that's okay. You want to chop for a little bit?
Yeah. I'll take.
Here, I can do this.
So what I love about your article and about what we're doing is that. So often with symbolic foods, just the fact of the symbolism is enough and is sort of satisfies the story, and it's a charming story. But what I love about your recipes is that they really taste good too. So you took the effort to.
Oh, thank you.
No, I'm not promoting you. I'm just saying that that's something about the way food is today, like Avi was saying, as a marker of identity, but also. The more chefs that get involved in it and the more interest there is in food, is that we want it to really taste good too. That we want to be, okay, so I'll...
So put that, this is cinnamon, which is really one of the oldest spices. And I think that Jews got cinnamon from Ceylon over these boats that just went with the monsoons over to Africa, up the Rift Valley to the Temple of Solomon. And so cinnamon has always been an important thing for Jews. It's something that after at Havdalah on Saturday night, there's always cinnamon to smell so that the scent of the Sabbath can linger during the week. Wow. So it's been, and
beautiful stories.
Yeah. Okay, so let's see, keep going. This is
yep,
wine.
Here's the honey.
Oh, here's the, oh man, okay. Here's the honey. And of course, honey for sweetness. And here's the lemon. And And I actually, the way I like to do, I don't know how you like to do it, but I like just to use my fingers like this. Do you?
I use that or one of the, or a spoon
reamer?
to put a, yeah, like a spoon inside. Because I can never find the utensils that I want, so it's better
Okay.
just to use your fingers.
I can't believe I'm doing this with you, Bill.
This is great.
Usually we just eat together.
Yeah,
Okay.
now we're
And he
doing
sneaks
some
me
work.
something. Okay, and this is the pear. Now the reason that we have a little bit of apple with the pear is the apple gives the haroset a crunch that the pear might not, because I usually make mine either the morning of or the day before.
So this pear is a variation on the traditional
right,
recipe?
exactly. But the pears are delicious. It's a really nice haroset.
Yeah.
And you can let me just, can I grab this? This
Oh,
is
yeah.
was made yesterday, so it's a little bit brown. I mean, you know that's going to always become brown. So that the way you could do it is, if you wanted to do it traditionally, the way that they did in Babylonia, you just make a little ball. You see that? And you give each person a ball.
So were you saying that recalls the mortar and pestle of the builders as well?
No,
Wasn't that
wait a second.
or the
mortar.
the mortar.
Maybe the pestle. I like the guy. Okay. Why not?
However they made their cement in those days.
Right. But you can see how this, look at this is, come to my kitchen this week.
Yeah.
Believe me, every time we plan to do something, the White House steps in and he can't do it.
So we decided to do something at the White House.
Right, exactly. Okay, that looks beautiful. We don't want to do it too much because you want to crunch.
Okay.
So here, taste it. Do you want to taste?
Oh yeah, looks fantastic.
It's good. Very good.
Delicious.
Okay. Is that, we have a little bit more, okay. You want to talk some more? Do you want to ask, we'd like to have any comments about your own haroset or?
Well, I can mention as part of the White House, how important this has become, the Seder, for the Obama family. And it was first celebrated during the campaign trail. And after that, it was a time in the campaign that things moved in a more positive direction and things picked up steam. And so it took on a really important value because the people who were on the campaign were having the Seder and the president happened to be passing by and, oh, what's going on here? So he joined. And so now every year we do that again in the house. And it's a very private and intimate sort of celebration that the president has with family and friends and members of the administration. And the members of the administration bring recipes from their homes, from grandmothers and mothers and favorite recipes, and then they give them to us chefs, and we recreate them. So it's really a cool family sort of celebration here.
So what are some of the recipes?
We've done brisket. We've done, of course, many different harosets. I do a flourless chocolate cake, and we've been given like apricot roll
roulade,
sort of
that's-
thing.
that was
Yeah, the
from mine.
roulade. So all really great things, and everybody participates, and the story is passed on to the children, and includes a really wonderful moment in the house.
It's great. It's great. And now you're getting sort of a Hillel sandwich, which was like the first sandwich of horseradish and haroset, and I hope that you like it. But it is a nice haroset, isn't it? It's very, yeah. But what I've noticed in going around the world is, oh my goodness, look who's here. Is that the haroset wanders depending on what's available. So let me just think. In Curacao, for example, they have coconut, they have cherry preserves in theirs because that's what's available. And there are several different kinds of recipes. In Venice, they might have chestnuts in it.
Very
and
nice.
I found a 13th century French recipe with chestnuts and apples. So it
Awesome.
depends on, again, what's available.
Seasonal.
And what's seasonal. And so there, I don't know if any of you have unusual family haroset recipes. I know that when I got married, my mother-in-law used to grind her haroset, and it was almost a puree, and it was apple and nuts because the the majority of American Jews, I guess I started saying that before, came from Eastern Europe at the turn of the last century. And so they brought with them apples and nuts because there were no dates in Eastern Europe. And it wasn't a southern climate. So they made apple and nut haroset, and she must have originally, and I never asked her this, used a mortar and pestle to grind it. But my mother liked a choppier haroset. And so it's very hard for you to decide what you want to do at your own Seder, because either you have both or you have yours or the other.
So those with different traditions, yeah, will not recognize.
Oh,
maybe.
absolutely. Yeah.
Joe,
Judy.
can you tell us in your travels a little bit about the variation overseas around the world of Seders, not perhaps food, but also
Well,
various Seders?
I think it's really, in a way, like Seders here. I mean, I've been at Seders, Yemenite Seders, where you sat on the floor. But it depends on the family. I mean, some Seders are very quick. Some of them are very long. I was in one Seder here that I left at midnight. It went on till 3 o'clock in the morning. Persian Seders are so different because they use, what do you call it, the scallions to hit each other. You've got to read my article. And then the Moroccan Seders, they take the Seder plate and put it over your head, and as if you personally were walking from slavery to freedom. In Iraqi Seders, the little kids have a sack on their back, and they play this game, a play, where are you going? I'm going to Jerusalem. Where are you coming from? Iraq. And what are you doing? And you go around the room doing this with a little bundle on your back. So that's what I love about Seder, that you can put your own imprint on it. And I thought that in this country, especially during the civil rights movement, where, Jews felt they were free, and they aligned themselves with the blacks. So there are a lot of freedom Seders, and then again with the Russians. So that it's, on the one hand, it's the longest, or one of the longest, continually observed, holidays in the world, and yet it's also so unbelievably modern because there's movement here for change as well. And I was thinking too that I couldn't have written an article like I wrote this week in the New York Times maybe 10 years ago. Everything was a little bit too prescribed, and I would have been afraid to write it. But so far, all it's doing is it was number 6 most popular when I last looked. But the point is that I think that this is a country where everybody can be somebody. And what I do think that's really important is that everybody holds on to their tradition, whatever the particular traditions. And that's why the NEH trying to have food as part of their programs is so important, because it seems to me in a world where everything is the same, that everyone is, looking at their emails, looking at whatever, that food is the one thing that says, this is my family and this isn't your family, and I want to pass this on to my children. And I mean, just look at that beautiful story that was told to us before. That's why people come back to Seder. And I think it's really important. People are always saying to me, oh, I want something new at my Seder. I don't think so. I think you want old, good recipes, because that's what you can hold on to.
Yeah.
Do you agree?
I do. And what Avi was saying is so interesting, that now food is considered a fit subject for a museum exhibit and for books that relate it to anthropology and to culture in general. And it is, I think, if it's not a fine art, it's at least something that's so important to culture and to the way we see ourselves and define ourselves. It's what is more visceral and what is more like part of our identity than what we eat. And with the charming story that goes with it, this is a symbolic sense, but there's also just the way it communicates to everyone, because it's universal. Everyone can enjoy something like this,
right,
and then find out about, well, this is what this religion is about. This is what these people are about. So what better way to communicate? And I'm so happy to see it in museums and see it in universities. NYU now has a program, which is food studies, everything. It's when I was coming into the business, the only food studies were cooking and baking courses, which were great, and those do well too. But now people are studying it as part of paleontology, anthropology. I was talking with Avi earlier, and we had a program at the Museum of Natural History in New York where we would bring in, we brought in Patrick McGovern, who is a paleontologist at the UPenn. He's the man who first sort of developed studies on the advent of monotheism in the Middle East. And he found the first wine urns, the first urns in Turkey where wine had been made 10,000 years ago. So these were traditions that were developed as soon as human beings formed city-states. As soon as they stopped being nomads and settled down into city-states, they were already creating wine. What an incredible thing to know that is about how that tells us who we are today, and how much wine is part of the Jewish tradition, the Christian tradition, and these symbolic foods started because they were so essential to who the people were.
And also, we were just talking before about like spices.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, we think, well, maybe 2,500 years ago, people were looking for spices all over the world. They weren't. It was maybe 3,500 years ago.
Yeah.
And people, I keep thinking about it, people that were living in Indonesia went on these hollowed out boats. I mean, it was really dangerous to go across the world practically to Africa.
But they were doing it,
and they were doing it because they could pick up gold in Africa,
right.
and they could, they could exchange goods. And
based on food.
Based on food.
Yeah.
I mean, because it wasn't just to eat the food. The cinnamon was used for, what did they do to the bodies in Egypt? You know?
Right, embalmed them.
Embalmed them.
Right.
They used it from embalming. They used them for the humors, like chocolate. This is getting off of Passover a little bit, but chocolate.
Everything
chocolate.
Has to do with
Well, chocolate was started as a drink, and again, it was something that improved the humors. And then Jews that were went to Latin America and brought it back to Europe as a drink, and then also
where it was kept secret for hundreds of years until the Inquisition, and Jews started leaving Spain and went to France, bringing chocolate with them.
Oh, you
and
read
then
my
there was
book.
yes, I did. So they brought chocolate. There would be no chocolate if it had not been for the Jews moving around and bringing chocolate to the rest of Europe.
And then they showed people, they started making chocolate as a drink and then as a candy. Yeah. And, the rest is history.
And now life is based around chocolate, at least mine is. Yeah.
Right.
Avi is calling us on time.
Right,
yes.
okay. Ooh, I don't need.
Do we sit back down?
Yeah, we sit back down.
Thank you. That offered a wonderful segue, actually, to Karen Falk, the curator of the museum, who will also pick up on the theme of food proliferation in her story about the Passover. Before she starts, I actually wanted to call out the museum's favorite grandfather, Senator Benjamin Cardin of Maryland. He's one of our faithful visitors, and he comes because he brings his granddaughters to our children's and family programs. Ben, it's a pleasure to see you.
Can I have the, this one? Well.
I have a confession. As a kid, I was a picky eater, and I hated Passover. I mean, first of all, there's the foods you have to eat. Parsley, harosis. Maybe if Joan had been making the harosis, I would have eaten it. But I'm not so sure. And then there's the foods that you can't eat. I practically lived on bread. And my mother would take pity on me. She saw how I suffered. She'd shorten the holiday just a little bit maybe for me. But it was not exactly easy. And to make matters worse, to add insult to injury, my birthday falls during Passover many years. And I have to say, those egg white matzo meal cakes, they were just not going to make me happy. Not good. Now, this was during the 1950s and 1960s, when the Passover food landscape was pretty barren. But there were a few compensations. there was Coca-Cola. Kosher and kosher for Passover all year long since 1935, when, Joe knows the story, when Rabbi Tobias Geffen of Atlanta was given a look at Coke's closely guarded trade secret recipe. He tweaked a few ingredients here and there and gave it his certification. And it's been kosher ever since. It wasn't until the mid-1980s that the soda companies started to trade out the sugar for the corn syrup, and all of a sudden we all had to go start looking for that special Passover batch. Now, there were also some things there were other things that I liked. There was Barton's chocolates. Almost forgot about Barton's chocolates. Remember those chocolates on a stick? Oh, how I loved those. Barton's was a mid-century marketing phenomenon in the United States. The company was started when Stephen Klein, a Viennese chocolatier, came to this country in 1938. By 1940, he had introduced chocolate-covered matzah. And by 1950, he had a string of chocolate boutiques across the country, and he had also pioneered this terrific idea of synagogue fundraising through chocolate. And that's how Barton's got to my family's Seder table. We could have eaten them any time of the year, but actually we only ever had them after the Afikomen. And then there are the foods that are so much a part of the Seder that they might as well be part of the ritual. Matzo ball soup, gefilte fish. Now, my mother's chicken soup recipe came from her mother, and her matzo ball recipe came from the Fairmount Temple Sisterhood cookbook, but her gefilte fish came from a jar. After Mothers and Manischewitz started to bottle the stuff in around 1940s, nobody in my family was going to be potchking around with carb. Now, I didn't realize as a child that the changeover from eating bread to matzah was really just a minor blip in my culinary routine. Because I come from a family where we didn't recognize that there were pages in the Haggadah after you got to the meal. Like, did we never count and think about where that fourth cup was? I still don't understand that one. But when my husband and I decided to set up a more observant family in the 1970s, observant home in the 1970s, I had to learn the rules. I remember that I have to tell you this one, that I brought green beans to the first Seder that we were invited to as a married couple. I didn't know you didn't eat green beans on Passover. I'd never heard of kitniot. Come to find out, he's questioning it. Come to find out, you didn't know you didn't eat green beans on Passover either. Yes, yeah. Come to find out, kitniot is part of a 700-year-old controversy where some authorities, some rabbinic authorities said that because these small foods that you could grind into flour, like the chametz flours, things like beans, peas, corn, rice, peanuts, poppy seeds, sesame seeds, could be mistaken or mistakenly mixed with chametz flours, they should be off the table during Passover. Now, other authorities never did agree with that, notably the Sephardim. And I have to say that every year I have a few friends who go searching for their Sephardic heritage right before Passover. Then came the 1980s, and we started a family. And I was punished with a son who had the same kind of picky eating habits that I had. But luckily, in 1990, Crispy-O's came out. And how did we ever survive without kosher for Passover potato chips? Kosher for Passover marshmallows. S'mores on matzah were a huge hit with my crowd for a little bit. And then, in the 90s, my husband and my daughter were found to have high cholesterol. And that ushered in a very brief era of low-fat, low-cholesterol Passover cooking. Let me just say, worst idea ever. Well, last night I just did my Passover shopping at Kosher Mart. And I have to say that I was astounded, really astounded at the variety of the foods on the Passover shelves these days. I saw kosher for Passover biscotti, kosher for Passover wasabi sauce, kosher for Passover imitation soy sauce. We can have our Chinese food even during Passover now. Kind of good. But my own approach to Passover food, really, I kind of pass up a lot of the processed things. I think that my own approach is a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables, so a little bit of meat and fish, a few matzah-based carbs, and I think that is both an old and perhaps the most contemporary eating sensibility that we have, just those fresh fruits and vegetables. Now, probably one thing in my mind that marks the change in Passover eating the most is this, that last year my granddaughter was born, actually just a few days before my own birthday. So I have to say that I had the thought, oh, that poor little girl is going to have to suffer with Passover birthday just like I do. But really, maybe not, because for her first birthday, she's going to have a homemade, always appropriate for Passover, delicious, special, dark chocolate, flourless tort.
Okay, that was very nice, and a perfect segue into what we're doing now, which is an old dessert. I myself try never to buy prepared foods for Passover. I really feel it's the time to go to all the cookbooks, not just mine, but everyone's, where we find these old recipes. And prepared foods are the worst things you can eat. And even if you eat a dessert that's made at home, there's
With good
history.
ingredients.
With
Yeah.
good, so anyway.
Well, it is a healthy diet. It's sort of the Mediterranean diet, which is what everyone is trying
Exactly.
to reach for. So we're right in the groove there too, as far as let's move.
Okay, you're
Can I
going to be
have
on the
the egg
side.
white? Want me to go over there?
Or
Okay.
let's do this first, okay? This is
Okay.
what you all came for, to watch Bill doing the egg whites.
So this is actually a baking lesson as well, and meringue is a very special part of baking and a very key part that many people make mistakes on. Number one, the bowl has to be impeccably clean, because if there's any grease or oil on the bowl, the egg whites won't turn into a foam, won't build up. So a very clean bowl, warm egg whites, so these have been sitting out for a few minutes. Warm is better than cold, they beat up better. There's a lot of myths about how to whisk them, but the most important thing is that the tines have to go through the whites and of course drag air in with it. The age of the whites, actually, if you save egg whites in your refrigerator, they're better the older they get. And there's really not much nutritive value in there, so they don't go bad. If you keep them in the refrigerator, you can keep them for weeks, and they whisk up very good. So
Now look, you should really watch this.
here's how you do it.
Here's a pro.
And you sort of learn to be ambidextrous because your arm wears out after a while. But most whisks are very well balanced today. This one has a little weight in the handle, so you can kind of do the... so that's about as fancy as I get when it comes to egg white. And if you have a KitchenAid at home, you're even in better shape. So it's interesting because the albumin, of course, forms a foam around the bubbles that you're putting in there, and this can be the ability to do that is increased by adding cream of tartar. Cream of tartar is an acid which then breaks down some of the proteins. It allows the protein chains to relax, which means they can form around the bubbles. So for this amount of egg whites, you might put just a 1/4 teaspoon of cream of tartar. So that's my meringue lesson, Joan.
Oh, it looks beautiful. I love it. I love
I'll
watching
keep
it.
going.
All right, well, keep doing it while
Noisy, but
I'm doing the rest of this. Okay. So this recipe, Kremsel, is an old family recipe. It was my father, when he came from Germany in 1929 and married my mother a few years later, didn't want to do a Passover Seder. And he just felt first of all, he had felt unsure of his English, and although his grandmother was religious, he came from Germany, he was not particularly religious, so he just didn't want to. And my mother said to him, I will make, and he kept saying, but I really love Kremsel, or Kremsel. And my mother said, I'll make a deal with you. I will make Kremsel from the Settlement Cookbook, which is the cookbook she still uses, even though I've written 10 cookbooks. She's 98 years old. And he agreed that he would use the Maxwell House Haggadah for the Seder. And anyway, so I've been making this recipe, and as many people do, I've tweaked it a little bit each time I make it. Now I put the 3 matzah in very cold water for just a minute because I like the crunch. And this is a very, very old Passover recipe, and it's in many incarnations. There's savory and there's sweet in many different cultures. I did a story last year for Tablet Magazine about a Kremsel that was from Siberia that went to Manchuria.
Wow.
And after the article, there were all these emails from people that had had this recipe from all over the world. It was pretty, I get, Bill, you're not going to believe this, but I get really sort of very emotional about Jewish food.
It's very moving, yeah. I mean, there's Mongolian Jews who are that's really amazing.
Well, they went there during the wars, you know. We're always migrating. Okay, so either for business, looking for things, or fleeing. The two. Okay, so then you just chop this up, and you add some chopped nuts. I put currants in it. This was originally the only fruit that was put in it. Now I put apricots. I put a little bit, you always have to put a tiny bit of salt in everything. Cinnamon. Lemon rind. I love lemon. Don't you?
Love it, yeah.
He brought me once the most wonderful. Do you remember that?
The lemon pudding?
I don't know if a lemon pudding cake. It was just divine.
Yeah.
And then, of course, lemon.
We served it at the state dinner a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, you did? That's
Yeah,
right.
It was very nice. Yeah.
That was another time I couldn't see him. State dinner. Okay. And actually, can I tell them what you asked me about? He wanted to know what Netanyahu liked to eat. And I kept trying to find out. I couldn't exactly.
Well, coconut macaroons.
The coconut macaroons. I knew that everybody likes the King David Hotel's coconut macaroons.
We were putting the charm offensive on that day, so trying to get
Okay, and
all
sugar.
the inside information I could.
And I put a little bit of matzah meal. I rarely, by the way, use matzah cake meal. I usually use matzah meal. Okay, and then what we're going to, and of course the egg yolks. And you mix all this together, and then he's going to put it all in.
So this is really why I became a pastry chef, because of this type of thing. Because you take egg whites, it's like magic. I always thought it was like, there's a kind of magic. And so you come to, thank you. I've never been applauded for making meringue before. I like it.
And of course, meringues are great to have at Passover.
Yeah, right.
They're wonderful. And German Jews, again, made these meringues always with strawberries. So
Nice.
look at, doesn't that look beautiful?
Yeah.
Look at what he's done. Wow.
Okay.
So do you mix it with that to mix it in?
Not for something like this.
You wanna do
If
it?
there's If there
Or
are
a spatula?
heavier items, then it'll just, if you use a whisk, it'll completely break down. If it's a liquid, you can use the whisk because you save time by using the whisk, so
But
you
this
don't
is
need
a
as
little
many
bit too
folds.
heavy.
Yeah,
right.
this is heavy, so you got to be really gentle. But using the fold over technique, we'll go into our baking lesson again. So you cut into the middle and fold over. I'm sure you've seen Julia Child do it a million times. But the idea is, of course, you spend all that time introducing air into the meringue, and it's fragile, but if you are very careful with it, you get this really nice and light texture, and then as you heat it, the air bubbles expand, and so you really get a nice fluffy
beautiful?
texture. Yeah, I love the color too.
So what I do with this, maybe this is wrong, I refrigerate it for like 20 minutes.
Well, you would need it, right? Because
Right.
it needs to hold together.
And
yeah.
so this has been refrigerated.
Yeah, well,
And-
it doesn't break down that much in
right.
the fridge.
And then what we did, we could not, they wouldn't let us fry here.
here.
But it's fried.
Imagine that.
And the fritters are, and this is the way they look. You can taste one, Bill. Oh, and then what
Oh,
I do
yeah.
is I sprinkle some powder on it. And this
cool.
would not be my Seder without it. I very often
looks
make a
great. Thank you.
compote with it, or stewed prunes, and you're going to have it. And everybody loves it, and then it's great to heat up for breakfast the next day, because who has the energy to make a breakfast? You know, and everybody wants something. Everybody, I don't know if this is the same at your Seder as at my Seder, but at the end of the Seder, it's too bad he has to do the White House Seder this year. But at the end of the Seder, nobody wants to leave. I'll tell you what I think. I think it's not just the Seder. I think that we all need meetings where there's
community
continuity,
develops,
and community
yeah. It's not
develops,
only-
and there's history, and there's culture, and you realize that you don't want that moment to end because you're out of time. You're into another sphere, and anyway,
These are
so.
delicious. I hope they're passing them out. I feel guilty eating them.
Do you have any questions? Yes.
Ever use honey
For this?
instead of sugar?
Sure, why not? Don't you think? Yeah, you could use it. Could use even maple syrup, do you think?
Yeah. Although that's more watery, so you'll lose
Yeah,
some
right.
of the
Any other questions? But they're really, I love them. I hope you like them.
Delicious.
And I think I went over there this morning and they were just about to make them at the JCC. Yeah.
If you were to make a savory version of this, how would you?
A what?
savory, salty.
Oh, well, some of the cremes will have meat in them with potatoes around them. Let's see. There are some that are just with salt, and you just wouldn't have sugar in them. And you make them. But I kind of like them sweet. But and the one that I made, the Siberian one, had a little bit of jam inside. And it was really interesting. This woman, when I was speaking in Providence, Rhode Island once, she came up to me and she said, you know, I'm from Siberia and I have some recipes.
Wow.
And I realized she had one recipe. And she had nothing left of her life in Siberia except this one recipe.
Wow.
And that's what holds
Holding
people
on
together.
to that, yeah.
Yeah, it's
that
just,
identity.
absolutely. We have
spread of-
I have like one more minute to talk, right? A few more minutes. But, you know, I'm just going to tell you, I was thinking about this, that my mother-in-law, who was a Holocaust survivor from Poland, we would always make the gefilte fish every Passover. And she would take the 2 carrots, or first she put 2 raisins in the eyes of the fish, and at the end, and she'd sigh. And I knew why she sighed, because she was remembering her mother, who was killed in the Holocaust. And it was just one more. The other thing that she used to do, she would say, you have to cook gefilte fish for 2 hours. So she would make the fish, and we would put it, you know, to boil, because cooked is cooked, 2 hours, you know.
Yeah.
So I would let her go to sleep, take a nap, and we'd turn it off after 20 minutes. And she always thought it was such wonderful gefilte fish. I never told her.
She knows now.
And I'll just tell you one other good story about, see the shank bone there? Well, my mother's shank bone doesn't look like my shank bone. And I realized that my mother, who is 98 years old, has been freezing her shank bone for 40 years. But then, and these are the stories that make families, right?
That's true, yeah.
Does anybody have one family story to share with us? I mean, my mother is really a total character, but I mean,
It's very moving to hear, especially given the incredible history that Jews have suffered and gone through, but the resilience and the will to survive and to thrive is wonderful.
Is really
Yeah,
over.
and
I
as
would agree with.
expressed in the food is, it's really powerful.
And,
Thank you.
Well, and
for
also, I
sharing that.
just want to tell you how I can't believe that this is happening, and it's really, wonderful, because what happens usually, and you would agree with this, chefs do demos. They don't talk about culture and history. There's nothing.
Right.
It's nothing. It's my recipe. There's nothing that connects us to who we are. So thank you for having all of us here.
Thanks. I hope there's many more. Thank you. Great job. Watch out.
Jen and Bill, that was simply wonderful, and I'm sure that a nomination for the Guinness Book of World Records is in the offing for the 40-year Pasco lamb in the freezer. It's wonderful to be with a world record holder on an occasion like this. It's my pleasure to introduce Rachel Silas, the Program Manager for the Jewish Museum of Maryland, who will share with us a story not about the great traditions and not about the food, but about the people around the table. Rachel?
So mine is not a story about food. It's a story about the people who cooked the food, who set the table, who read the story, and who ate together. Growing up, we always had Passover Seders at my aunt and uncle's basement, which meant that once and one time only each year, we would pack up the ping pong table and roll it away, cover the air hockey table with platters of food and a tablecloth, and carry card tables and folding chairs down the steps and set them for service for 20, 30 people. And it mattered where you sat. Well, for me anyway. As the youngest, I could end up sandwiched, bored between my parents, or waiting nervously and anxiously, seated next to an older cousin, trying very hard not to seem like a baby, which was, of course, more difficult on Passover as opposed to all other nights, when the youngest, of course, has a special job. And I would wait for that moment when every eye would turn to me, kind of like now, and everyone would say, "Rachel, stand up, time for the 4 questions." I could have just about died of embarrassment. Why no one had seen fit to provide me with a little brother or sister, even a baby cousin who might have taken that one awful moment away from me, I could never understand. Well, the rest of the evening was pretty much standard, except that my aunt and uncle, as the hostess and host of the evening, could feel free to spring a new tradition on us at any given moment. And they did. Some years we would open up the Haggadah and there would be new inserts. Ugh. 5 extra minutes between us and dinner. And of course there was the year that the 3-dimensional plagues showed up, except that the grandparents were not fans of the plastic locusts and rubber frogs that went splat right in glass number 2 of wine. So that tradition got retired. And then one year when we were passing out the Haggadahs, my aunt said, "All right, okay, I have a new tradition. This year, we're all going to turn to the back page of your Haggadahs and write your name and the year." Well, there were eye rolls and smirks, and not just from the kids. And it was hardly a surprise the next year when we opened up the Haggadahs to the last page, and about half of them had my aunt's name scribbled in various people's handwritings instead of their own names. But when she announced the tradition one more time, there was a little bit less commotion. We flipped to the back page, signed our names and the year, and it continued year in, year out. Flip to the back page, sign your name, the year, and check out who's had it in years before you. Do you remember that name? A cousin's college roommate, an old friend visiting from out of town, boyfriends and girlfriends who got phased out over the years as husbands and wives came into the picture, and in-laws, and of course eventually children. And there were old regular names that stopped appearing as some of our relatives fell victim to old age and others were taken a little bit too soon. But they were all there every year. Let all who are hungry come and eat here in this basement. Let all who are needy share in this Passover Seder. But don't forget to sign your Haggadah.
I'd like to mention, for your edification, that the recipes which Joan and Bill have favored us with us today are actually available online at whitehouse.gov/American Jewish Community. And other members of the White House staff have also been contributing their recipes to this website so that you can probably prepare an entire Passover Seder this year directly out of the White House, your own White House Seder, as it were. So a pleasure there. And I'd also like to mention that directly outside the room in the hall, there are cards, recipe cards, and envelopes for the pleasure of all of you. If you will fill out a recipe or a story about Passover and mail it into the National Endowment for the Humanities, the NEH is planning to put out a little booklet of your recipes and your stories to disseminate to the American public. So you have an opportunity to go on record with your favorite Passover story itself. Oscar Wilde, who often got things right, albeit in a highly satirical fashion, has his canon remark in The Importance of Being Earnest. My sermon on the meaning of the manna in the wilderness can be adapted to almost any occasion, joyful, or, as in the present case, distressing. I have preached it at harvest celebrations, christenings, confirmations, on days of humiliation, and festal days. Like Mr. Wilde's manna, the Passover Seder is an endless source of interpretation and meaning. Each year, as we complete our preparations for the festival and the Seder, we recall memories of past Sidarim and start thinking about the Sidarim yet to come. Each year, we celebrate the traditional and the familiar. Each year, we try something new, a new blessing or story, a new Haggadah or ritual. Each year, we add to the possessions we have accumulated on our annual journeys out of Egypt. For us, the Seder is our manna, food for thought throughout the year. Today, I think back to my childhood when Passover foods came in a giant cardboard box, a box so big that I could use it as a playhouse, the box at least as welcome and exciting as the festival foods. I think back 10 years ago to my nephew arriving at our Seder with sheets of rabbinic text in hand, ready to lead what turned out to be a lengthy discussion on the large meanings in small details of the ritual. I remember Michael Walzer's book, Exodus and Revolution, in which he argues that Passover is the great paradigm of self-liberation, enjoining us to take the next challenging steps in the cause of social justice. I remember my parents and my grandparents, and I remember my grandsons. So small last year and so engaged. And I wonder what will happen at this year's Seder and which of the stories we have heard today I will take with me to our Seder table, perhaps to resonate, embroidered and polished for a year or a decade or even a generation. On behalf of the Jewish Museum of Maryland, I invite you to come up for a visit to see Chosen Food. It'll be here till the end of the year, and I can promise you, you will come away with a story or an idea worth repeating in your family. Our thanks to the White House Office of Public Engagement and to the National Endowment for the Humanities for sponsoring this wonderful event. Our thanks especially to Joe Nathan and Bill Yassis for their wonderful demonstrations, and to the DCJCC for providing refreshment during the event itself. We didn't even have to wait till the end. I would also like to thank everyone here for taking the time to join us for this lovely occasion.